Listen for the other guy.
Good morning, everyone. How are you today? Looks like everyone's
Good
doing
morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, so yeah, as I said, John, I know John Gibbons is off dropping his daughter off at the airport to head back to Germany after she came for a family vacation. And John said that he won't be able to be here this morning. Rachel can't be here this morning. I'm not sure why, but I'm sure she has a very good reason. And I can tell you that John, Bill Blackwell, Kung, and I first met yesterday on Zoom, and we were working on resolving some issues with who's going to do the programming to get the data from the Raspberry Pi on the new Grape 2 up to the server. And so it turns out that that is going to be Kung's job. So Kung is our Masters of Software Engineering student working on the project. So he's going to take the lead on getting that code and those and that data specification developed on the Raspberry Pi for the Grape 2. Kung is going to be getting that data from a Raspberry Pi Pico that's being programmed by Bill Blackwell, who's also on the call here today. And the hardware is all being provided by John Gibbons, which I think he is very close to having everything, having a working system. So I know he has been very busy ordering lots of parts. I've been seeing that come through. And he says that it's very close. Bill Blackwell, do you want to give any updates to that?
We're going to be working with Kung. We're very happy to have him on the team to do the Raspberry Pi software. I'm working on a thread reader for the USB high-speed Raspberry Pi program that will run in a separate core on the Pi, and hopefully just give that over to Kung when he's up to speed, and he can expand on it and perfect it. And on the Pico itself, we're still not getting data from the A to D converters. I'm not sure why. Maybe my program or John has been away, but he's back on the in town, and can look at that probably right away. So we'll get that resolved within a day or two, I think, and start to see converted A to D data on the Pico and then uploading to the Pi.
That sounds fantastic. And Kung, do you want to give any updates on your perspective of this?
Well, I think you and we already cover much of what we discussed yesterday. So
Great. So then the second half of that is going to be getting the data from the Grape up to Bill Engelke's personal space weather station database, which is up and running. So Kung is also going to be working on that side of things too. So Kung's going to be the interface going from the Raspberry Pi up to the database. So we had a good discussion with Bill yesterday about that, and also talked a little bit about how we want the data visualization on the website to look once the data gets up there. So the priorities are going to be getting the Raspberry Pi and the Grape to create the data. The second priority is getting that data up to the system, and then after that, it's going to be doing the data visualization. So Bill, do you want to make any comments? Bill Engelke, did you want to make any comments?
No, I think you pretty well covered it. Sorry, I was coughing when you were saying that. I didn't realize you turned it over to me.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, so I think that's where that is. Also, we are moving ahead with the Tangerine SDR, which I think is gradually morphing into the Clementine SDR. So as I said last week, we're taking the the RF module and the clock module that have already been produced. And we now have a team that's working on designing a USB interface board for those RF module and clock modules. So that USB interface board is going to replace the data engine that had the FPGA on it. We're going to use a system that does not use the data engine. So we have a team of people that are working on that new design. That includes Dave Witten, KD0EAG, Tom McDermott, N5EG, Majid Mukhtari, and a student, Rob Troy. And they're working also with Franco, forget his call sign. He's a little bit new to me, but I know he's giving us a lot of good advice. Franco, and then Rob Robinette, AI6 VN, I believe. Their goal is to develop this USB interface board, and then they're going to try to set it up to emulate a Grape 2. So we'll have both a software-defined radio version of the Grape that will be able to produce Grape data, and then also the Grape 2, as you know it now, which is more of a hardware-based version. So we have all that going on. I think that's pretty much it from here. A couple other things. It's been a crazy busy summer for me so far. Last week I was out at the University of Colorado in Boulder at the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics, LASP. I took 3 students with me, and my wife, who's also doing Antarctic magnetometer data analysis. And we met talking about, my job was to talk about medium scale traveling atmospheric disturbances. So I talked about how we saw that new observations we've seen with the SuperDARN data, and also how they relate to the large scale traveling atmospheric disturbances we see with the ham radio data, the RBN and the PSK reporter, and the WhisperNet data. So I think that was a really good meeting. Next week, I'll be out again because I'm taking a number of students and Scranton faculty members, and the students include Kung and Rachel Bodeker and other students we have working on the project here. We're going to go down to Virginia Tech for a week, and we're going to be spending an intensive week learning about SuperDARN data and actually meeting with the people who run the SuperDARN radars and do that analysis. So we've got a busy week ahead of us. How are people here doing with their grapes and the project?
I've got a few more components to solder on mine, so I haven't got my powered up yet. One thing I would like to talk about a little bit today is I've been looking at the list of volunteers for the Grape stations, and I'm starting to cull some data from that and have some questions that maybe we could go over.
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, is there anything else anybody wants to jump into? Otherwise, I'll share my screen. Okay, I'm running 2 computers here, so let's see if I can be ambidextrous. This is just going to work better.
Is this SO2C, Gary?
Yeah, I think so. So we've gotten about 41 volunteer either replies through the website. I think there are 25 or 28. And obviously the existing Grape users, in fact, pretty much everybody that's on this call is on that list of 41. Looking through that, one of the things I been wondering about right along is if we're going to supply an antenna or people want to use their own. So out of the 28 respondents that came through the form on the Grape webpage on HamSci, about half have said they'll use their own existing antenna. Now, what I don't know, and I think we're going to need some closer contact with everyone, is I don't know if these people realize they need to put a dedicated antenna on there, 24/7, 365 ideally. Obviously, they can disconnect it and turn their Grape off and stuff. In a perfect world, they'd be able to dedicate an antenna to it full time. So I'm not sure everybody's got that message or not. I'll have to go back to people, I think. About a quarter of the people said they would like to have an antenna supplied by HamSci. They don't have anything available currently. And another quarter said they have an existing antenna, but they would take anything that was provided and use it. And of course, a few people have some questions. You know, I've got a tuned loop for a single frequency, but I'd rather have a Grape 2, and I realize that's got a broader frequency spectrum it's got to cover. So there's just some discussion I think that needs to happen with a few of those people. So I don't know that anything here is really conclusive, but I know as we start thinking about putting together the Grape 2 packages, we're going to have to think about what we're going to do with an antenna.
Yeah,
Um,
I think you're right. I think John has some ideas for an antenna, and we did describe one in the original budget. So I think it might be good to touch base with John about that antenna design. And I think for people who are signing up and they say they want to do this, you know, I think we have a certain amount of money to give a certain number of these things away to people. And so I think the people who are going to receive a package that, you know, is all paid for, I think we really want to have them meet, we need to have them meet certain criteria, which is to make sure that that if they don't use the antenna we provide, that they do provide a dedicated antenna that is broadband, or is, you know, capable of the frequencies they plan on receiving. We would want those stations to commit to doing 24/7 for at least the next 2 to 3 years, which is basically the life cycle of this grant. And then we would also want to prioritize distributing those stations in such a way that they go to those places that are on that map in the grant proposal. For people who can't meet all of those criteria, you know, they're still welcome to participate. I just don't, they would have to probably, we wouldn't be able to give them equipment. So for people that were giving them equipment, we would ask that they would, you know, meet these criteria.
Good, that makes a lot of sense. That falls right into what I wanted to talk about next, was to take a look at the responses we've gotten briefly against the map that was in the CDAR grant. So here's the file of the responses we've gotten. I don't need to go into a whole lot of detail on this, but we've got roughly 40 people. They all have call signs, no surprise there, I suppose. But let me flip over to something a little more interesting.
Gary, just before you flip off of that, this is
Sure.
David in HAC. I'm just Canaan, not New Canaan.
Okay.
New
I thought I
Canaan's
heard
in
that.
Connecticut.
Okay. I thought I heard that from Nicole. That was my mistake. I picked it up at Hamvention. So, okay, I'll fix that.
Yep.
So briefly, just to review, a couple weeks ago, I showed on here, I took the map from the CDAR grant and assigned every US receiving location an alphabetical designator, alpha through X-ray. And I've taken those, given them lot lands, and then gotten grid squares from the CDAR map. And then I took a look at the volunteer list we've got. Now, again, we haven't vetted all these volunteers. We haven't made any decisions on who should or should not receive a grant radio or their own radio or whatever. But just to give you an idea, I took a look. These are the 20 odd CDAR grid squares, and we do have actually volunteers that match up fairly closely, CN85 to CN86. So that's within 2 or 3 degrees of longitude. They're adjacent grid squares. So my question is, I think that would be acceptable, but that's not my call, how close we really want to match the grid squares on the CDAR map.
So that's 65 miles.
I'll take your word on that, but I know it's not a long distance.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think we have to do kind of a best effort here. So I don't have a strong criteria for how far away. Yeah, we really have to use the volunteers we have. So basically we see how close we can get for the volunteers who are willing to host these things 24/7. And then we match it up as best we can that way. I would say anything that's, 50 to 100 miles from the dot is, totally acceptable.
Okay, good. That's what I'll work towards. So we've got a fair number of other direct matches. Of course, Dave Schwartz is the easiest one. But when we've got a lot of fairly people that are adjacent grid squares. Bill, I didn't have your grid square off the top of my head, but I know you're there in Alabama. So
Echo Mike 63 is correct, although the city would be Northport, not Duncanville.
Okay, well, what this city was the closest town on the grid, on the CDR map, so that, I realize
Okay,
that's not
okay,
your.
okay, I got you. Okay.
Yeah, it's confusing. So anyhow, and we of course got a lot of coverage in Cleveland. So anyhow, my point is I'm making progress now that I understand the 50 to 100 mile thing. And I understand the volunteer kind of requirements for receiving the grant. I'm going to go through this data again and start to build up, I guess, I don't know about a questionnaire, but think about what kind of dialogue we're going to want to have with these volunteers to really vet them before we make any final decisions. So that's where I'm at, and that's what my next steps are.
That looks great, Gary. Have you gone out to the Hamside listserv and really tried drumming up people to respond to this?
Actually, if I
I was
have
gonna,
not yet.
What's that?
Gary,
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
you know, I volunteered, and I don't see my name on the list. Does that mean something like you just forgot or?
No,
Or am I not on the list because I'm a Grape One or something?
No, I'll take a look at that, Bob, and see what happened, because
Because, yeah, I've got, it's dead at the moment and we don't know why, but I've got North Carolina on.
okay, yeah, I've only got a few people from the New England Grape Group on the list, so that's what I said.
Yeah, well,
It needs
I can
some
understand you don't
review.
want 99 and Groton, Mass, but.
No, that's okay. I'd rather have more than too
Yeah.
few. I mean, it's,
And I've got a couple of other potential locations. I want to
Well,
talk to you, to Nathan about, to Nathaniel about.
the
at some
best thing
point.
to do is to go to the hamsci.org/grape2
I
webpage
would-
and fill out the survey.
Yeah, I would also say that people like Bob who do reliably show up to these telecons should receive a certain amount of priority
Of
in
course,
receiving hardware or participating. You know, I do think we need to figure out how to get these, you know, people who show up and really participate, they need to be recognized. So, but there's a number of ways we can do that and still make it like scientifically useful. So for instance, we have a parallel effort, you know, where we're trying to merge the tangerine or clementine SDR in with this project. We may need people in the same geographic area to host both the tangerine or a clementine and a grape. So maybe if we don't send you a grape, maybe we'd send you a tangerine, which would be making the same sorts of measurements. But I think we should absolutely, you know, take some of these things into account as well.
Thanks.
okay, so the other question I want to make sure I'm clear on too is I know we, in some cases or many cases, we actually wanted both a Grape 1 and a Grape 2 for Christina's project, so it can move forward and so we can move forward with the CDR type research, right?
Right.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to say all that in a posting to the list
Yeah.
here, but okay.
I think the best thing to do is try to get as many people to fill the survey out as possible. And I do think it should be said that, you know, the priorities for distributing this will be according to people who can commit to running this 24/7. And antenna, a modest antenna will be provided if necessary. And so operating 24/7 and based on the distribution, the sampling needs, trying to spread out the sampling so we get adequate coverage of the continent.
Yeah, okay, those notes will help. I know John Gibbons had talked about a long wire antenna with a 9-to-1 balance.
Right.
And I'll talk to him about that the next time he's on the call, because I'm trying to think if the impedance of the Grape 1 or 2 is high enough. I'm not sure if the balance is going to buy us anything, but that's another story. So, okay, I know what questions to ask. I think I know how to phrase it, and I just need to wordsmith it. And we'll get some more people to fill things out and keep moving forward.
Where's
Well,
the
that's-
survey, Gary? Where is the survey?
Hamside.org/grape2. I'll put it in the chat while we're finishing up here.
Nathaniel, I wonder if we should have some kind of working group to come up with a recommended antenna or antennas.
I'd volunteer for that.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, because we've got both, broadband loop and E-field antennas that could be used for this.
There,
I think that would be wonderful, and that would take a little bit of pressure off of John. And you can, and then that way, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And Gary, you can also get from John, ask John how much he has budgeted, for each antenna at this point. So, because we did have a certain amount that we put aside to pay for an antenna for each person, but I've also turned that budget over to John for him to figure out what the best way to do the build was based on current parts availability. So if you could ask him what the current thoughts are for how much money we have for antennas.
Okay, and I'll also make a note of David's, obviously, idea of a working group. And W1XP already volunteered to join that, and we'll figure out how to get that going. Okay, that's it for me.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Gary. Gary, one other thought you can do when you're writing the I think trying to get people to fill out this form merits a blog post on the Hamside website. So what you can do is you can write up the blog post first, say like calling for volunteers, and then we should send that out, send it out to the Hamside listserv. And then maybe also put it out as through the NASA Citizen Science channel as well.
Okay,
Because I think we should try to get more than I think we can do better than 28 responses if we do a little.
yeah, we definitely need more than that.
Maybe EdF Check can help you with getting some of that word out.
Right. Yeah, we'll bring that up this afternoon as well.
That sounds great. I think the working group for the antenna sounds like a really good plan.
yeah, a lot of things work,
Mm-hmm.
As somebody taught me a long time ago, anything will radiate. It's just how well.
We can have different recommendations for various distances.
Yeah,
And-
I think
and-
that makes sense.
Anything
But-
from a wet noodle to a long wire.
Particularly on receive, if you can hear the local noise, you can probably hear whatever you could hear. What I'm saying is, you can't change propagation with the antenna, but you can change the antenna to match the propagation.
Now, keep in mind too, that we need an antenna that can cover a 3-to-1 frequency range, potentially 5 to 15
Yeah.
megahertz. So that implies a non-resonant something. So anyhow,
Yeah, well, the loop and the E-field active antenna, both are good candidates. And what matches any one person's situation is likely to be quite different, but some people, I'm sure, would have no problem putting up a long wire, and some people would say, gee, that nice little active antenna that there's several on the market that have questionable performance, but they work. Bill is using a very small loop, active loop in Florida, and it seems to work quite well, although it has a very bad review on one of the websites for Intermod, which is the problem with any active antenna at a wide frequency range, of course. But
I'm using something like that. I'm using the MFJ active loop, and it's got a little preamp in it, and it's wideband, and it seems to work fine. And I transmit like an antenna running 1.5 kilowatts 50 feet away, and it hasn't heard it. So
yeah, I've got the same situation, Bill. I've got a 8-foot whip, it's made out of aluminum tubing, but and a preamp at the base, which is based on the PA preamp, which is, and I've got a redesign of that amplifier using simple commonly available transistors. And that works just fine. And like you say, there's a 1500 watt signal 50 feet above it. And it hasn't burned it out yet. Maybe I need a bigger amplifier.
Yeah, I'm using the MFJ receive loop and haven't had any trouble.
Well, and you know, something like that's available it's not a
Yeah.
cheap thing.
Well, that and
No,
the
it's not.
DX engineering one that's around such, but they can be quite expensive, and we know how to make these. So
Yeah,
we should come up with a few recommendations for people.
Yeah, it wasn't cheap.
Yeah, the thing is, if you make it, it is cheap.
Yes.
well,
So we can come up with some designs.
a through-hole board design would probably match everybody easy. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be surface mount.
Yeah, well, you know, we
Um,
have loop antennas we use, but they, you know, our current design goes up to about 10 megahertz. We want to push it a little further than that, but it's easy enough to build there are a number of different preamps available. The
Yeah.
designs, both for E-field and loops, that will get beyond that.
I've got a friend who's a whiz at laying out PC boards with them. And
Yeah, PC board layout, I don't think we have a dearth of.
well,
A lot
My-
of us can do that.
yeah. But I'm just saying he's available
Yep.
to me.
Right. Well, I'm available to me.
Well, yeah. And you know, and
Yeah.
you can get boards pretty cheap, particularly if you're willing to cut them out of one big board.
Okay.
You could, it turns out pretty cheap and pretty quick from China, and I've used a lot of the boards, and they're really good quality with a good solder mask and so.
Now, what is it? We have the Grape through, is that far circuits or?
The Grape is Osh Park is making the blanks.
Yeah, Osh Park. Yeah, that's an, you know, this sort of thing only has to be 2 layer. It's very easy to put out there so that people can buy it. at
One thing,
reasonable
just
cost.
to keep everybody grounded, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but from a project manager perspective, a project like this has a lot of moving parts. I mean, you've got to select the site, they've got to be available, their antenna has to stay up, their preamp has to be working, their software's got to be there, their internet connection has to be reliable, 24/7, yada, yada. Each one of those pieces of the project has a probability associated with it. You know, there's a 90% chance that if somebody says they want to do this, they'll do it. There's probably a 95% chance their internet will stay up. There's probably an 80% chance their preamplifier will keep working and not get struck by lightning. But you got to remember is all those probabilities are multiplicative. So if you've got, 6 moving pieces and it's 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.8 times 0.7, by the time you get done, you've got about a 37% chance that any one station is going to be on the air for 2 to 3 years
Yep.
continuously. So
I think,
each one of these pieces, you need a very high probability of success.
yeah, well,
I
that also
think-
argues for a dense network.
Also, one of my recommendations regarding for the antenna working group, I think we have to keep in mind, due to the short timeline and because of the complexities Gary said, I think we need to very rapidly come up with a very simple, easy to ship antenna that is good enough
Right.
for the ones that we're going to deploy for the eclipses. And that may just come down to long wire with the Balun, because that may just be what our budget can have, and we just do that for what we're going to ship it initially. And then over time, the antenna working group can come up with better suggestions. But I do want to just charge the antenna working group with keeping that in mind, that for this initial run, we just need to keep it simple and expensive and working good enough.
Kissy,
Yes.
keep it simple and cheap.
That's
Exactly.
right. That's exactly what we need here. This cannot be complicated. We have enough complicated things.
Yeah, I think a piece of wire can be made to work pretty effectively over that frequency range.
I think so too. And I think that's also going to be relatively feasible for many different people to install too. So I think that's another factor. It's relatively easy to ship, it's cheap, and it's relatively easy to install in many different environments.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do some evaluation of various lengths of whips and loops. Up here in New Hampshire, we're about as far away from WWV as I think anyone will be.
You're at Dartmouth?
Yes,
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah. I was thinking, it's just, we just throw in a few insulators and a piece of wire and a piece of coax and say, here's a half dozen antennas you could build with this, which
Is there
will
any-
maybe fit people better than, a whip might fit one guy and a loop might work for another guy really easy.
Yeah. Are there any more pressing topics people would like to talk about this morning?
I have kind of an off-topic question for you, Nathaniel, it's not urgent.
Sure. What is it, Jim?
In preparing for this next class in the extra class that I'm teaching for the Ham Club here is on the ionosphere, and it got me thinking, what is the reason that the ionosphere is striated into several layers as opposed to being more of a continuous thing?
There's a couple of different reasons. A lot of it comes down to gravity, and there's a couple of competing things. So there's gravity, then there's different atmospheric constituents with different molecular atomic weights. So some of those are going to be pulled down to Earth more than others. So then that's going to lead to different types of atmospheric chemistry. Then you have a different atmospheric chemistry profile.
Yeah.
And then you also have the sun that's coming in from the top. You have the most energy at the top of the atmosphere.
Right.
And then as it passes through and ionizes things and interacts with other particles, you're going to have slightly less, somewhat less energy at the bottom. So between the variations in atmospheric chemistry as a function of height, the amount of solar radiation that's able to make it from the top all the way down, and then you combine into that, you have varying temperature profiles, and some regions of the atmosphere are more subject to turbulent mixing and mix everything up more, whereas other ones have less of that turbulent mixing. They have more of a homogeneous chemistry. All of those things together contribute to that stratified ionosphere and the characteristics of the different regions.
Okay, thank you.
If that's it, I think I'd like to go because I'm under an incredible amount of pressure to submit a large number of reports and other administrative things. And I have to get some lectures ready for the Virginia Tech class next week. But I am planning on being on the 4 p.m. meeting today. And I think this is moving along really well. So Gary, I really appreciate all of your work and keeping things organized and trying to figure out where these stations should go. The Bill Blackwell, I appreciate all of your work with John Gibbons doing the coding, Bob, George, Jim, Todd, everyone else who's running these stations. I really appreciate that as well. Rob for helping us, find this new direction with the Tangerine SDR. I can tell you, I just heard back from the NSF program officer just while we were on this call, and he said he approves of our new approach with the Tangerine SDR. So that's a good, step in the right direction. So the NSF likes what we're doing. We got approval to change the budget in that way. And of course, Bill Engelke, thank you for all of your hard work on everything, and Dave McGaw and everyone else. So I will see everyone at 4 o'clock. And I hope you have a great day.
Okay, thank you.
73 all.
73.
Dave,
3-0.
Dave, are you still here?
I'll leave
Dave
this
McGraw?
on. I'll stop the recording, but I can